Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 and today I am going to be putting together my own cast choices for a Superman 2000s movie. Now, I remember back in the early 2000s hearing rumours about possibly a brand new Superman movie coming out on the big screen. Now, we hadn't really had a Superman movie since 1987's Superman 4 The Quest for Peace. And all due respect to Christopher Reeve, bless his soul, that movie was a pile of trash. But there were some good bits in that movie. But sadly, it wasn't that great. And of course, we all remember in the 1990s we were going to be having a brand new Superman movie called Superman Lives, and it was going to be directed by Tim Burton, and Nicolas Cage was going to be playing Superman. But due to politics, egos, and all sorts of bullcrap going on with Warner Brothers, Superman Lives never saw the light of day, which is a shame, really, because that movie would have been really good, especially as Brainiac was going to be in it. But that's a whole other story for another time. So, throughout the rest of the 90s, we had no Superman movies, and then the rumor mill got rolling at the beginning of the 2000s that there was a possibility of a brand new Superman movie. But sadly, nothing happened up until 2006 when Superman Returns was released and it featured Brandon Routh in the lead role of Superman. And Superman Returns, while it was okay for what it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't amazing either. It was okay. But I have always wondered what would a Superman movie in the 2000s have been like? Who would have been cast? Who would have been the director? There's been so many things going around in my head about the possibility of seeing a brand new Superman movie for the new millennium. And quite frankly, I would have loved to have seen that. I think it would have been incredible. But sadly, the 2000s has long passed us by, and that opportunity has long since been dead in the water. So, for the purposes of this video, I am going to be putting together my own cast choices for who I would like to see appear in a Superman 2000s movie. And I'm kind of going back to my roots a little bit because when I started this channel back in 2014, the first video that I ever did was my cast choices for a Batman Beyond live action movie. And then after that, I did one of my cast choices for a Fantastic Four MCU movie. And I've done a few more after that. But it's been a really long time since I've done something like that. And it's been quite a long time. And I feel that it's long overdue to do another one like this. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to put together my own cast choices for a Superman 2000s movie. And, I'm pretty pleased with the choices I've made, and hopefully everyone else will like the guys that I've picked for the cast. So let's kick things off with my first choice for who I would like to see in a Superman 2000s movie. And we're kicking off with my first choice, Brendan Fraser as Superman. I've been a long time fan of Brendan Fraser, and I think he's an incredible actor and just an all round great guy. And I came across some pictures of Brendan Fraser in the Superman costume, and they appear to be screen tests for a Superman movie. Now, I read that he was tied to play Superman for a movie that was going to be called Superman Flyby. But for whatever reason, the whole project never got off the ground, and ultimately it got canned. But I feel Brendan Fraser is the perfect guy to play Superman because, first of all, he's the consummate gentleman, he's a pro, he's got a great sense of humor, he's very charming, and he's the ideal guy you would want as your leading man. And he's incredibly versatile. He can be a badass, he can be funny, he can be super serious. He wears his heart on his sleeve in everything he does, and it really shows in his performances. And he has so much heart. And when you watch the Mummy films, you know, he was so good in those films, and he just brings a great level of fun. And I'm not saying that the other actors who have played Superman don't bring fun to their performances because they do, but with Brendan Fraser, he is one of those guys. He's like the sort of person you would love to have as your dad because he has a dad quality to him. He's definitely somebody who you'd want to look out for you. And that's what Superman is all about. He's always about looking after and protecting everyone and just all round friendly guy. But at the same time, he's not somebody you want to get on their bad side. And I feel Brendan Fraser would embody all of those qualities of Superman and then some. But I also think that as great as he would be as Superman, I think Brendan Fraser would absolutely rock it as Clark Kent. I think he could really put on some fun and hilarious performances, channeling that classic nerdy and dorky persona of Clark Kent. I just think he would absolutely nail it. So if they really were going to go ahead with making a Superman movie for the 2000s, I would definitely cast Brendan Fraser because he just screams leading man, in my opinion. He's awesome. Love the guy so much. And as I said, an amazing human being. He's awesome. Okay, moving on to my next cast choice Courtney Cox as Lois Lane. This cast choice is dedicated to one of my good buddies, for one and only Geeker Beyond himself. And he has always said to me for many years that Courtney Cox is someone he would love to see play Lois Lane. And you know what? I can see why, because if you look very closely at Courtney Cox, she kind of does resemble Margot Kidder a little bit. And there's not many actresses out there who look very close to the iconic Lois Lane. The only other actress who really looks like Margot Kidder is Elizabeth Tulloch, who did an awesome job as Lois Lane in Superman and Lois. And, you know, Courtney Cox really does look the part. And obviously, anybody who grew up in the 90s, Courtney Cox was one of the stars of one of the greatest sitcoms of all time, Friends. And she's done some other stuff as well. You know, she's appeared in Scream. So she's got the background, she's got the pedigree, and she, as I said, really looks the part. And I think her and Brendan Fraser together, I think would have been the perfect modern equivalents of Lois and Clark for the big screen. So if I were going to cast someone to play Superman's iconic girlfriend, it would definitely be Courtney Cox because number one, she can be funny, she can be serious, she's very attractive, she can be feisty, you know, she can do it all. And you really need someone like that to embody all of those qualities of Lois Lane. And I think Courtney Cox does that and more. So if I was ever going to cast Lois Lane in a Superman movie for the 2000s, I would definitely go with Courtney Cox. She is awesome. and she can kick ass with the best of them. And she's a TV legend. Seth Green as Jimmy Olsen. You know, Jimmy Olsen is Superman's legendary pal. You know, he looks up to Superman, he idolizes him. And I think Seth Green would be perfect as Jimmy Olsen because, for starters, he's got red hair, much like Jimmy Olsen. Seth Green is a big goofball, just like Jimmy Olsen. And I can really picture Seth Green say, "Hey, Mr. Kent. Okay, Miss Lane. Sure, Chief." You know, I can imagine that. And Seth Green can do it all. He can be funny, he can be serious, you know, he can do it all. And I think Seth Green could really capture the youthful and exuberance of Jimmy Olsen beautifully. And I can picture the dynamic between him, Brendan Fraser, and Courtney Cox. I think those three together would be magic because that's what the core slash trinity of the Daily Planet is: Clark Kent, Lois Lane, and Jimmy Olsen. And, you know, it's funny because when you look at Seth Green in real life, he's kind of like that little brother who is absolutely annoying to you, but at the same time, he's so funny that you can't help but love the guy. And I think he could really capture the little brother aspects of Jimmy Olsen beautifully. And, you know, Jimmy Olsen, much like Lois Lane, Jimmy is always trying his best to impress everyone, get the best picture possible, and really get his name out there. And I think Seth Green is perfect to play that sort of character. And we've seen what he can do already. He's been in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, he was in Austin Powers, Scotty Doo, Scotty Doo, and zip it. You know, so he can do comedic stuff. So I think, you know, having someone like Seth Green playing Jimmy Olsen, I think would be real magic, in my opinion. And plus, he's the only guy I could think of who could play Superman's pal. So if we ever did get that movie in the 2000s, I would definitely pick Seth Green. He's just amazing. Such a fun guy. Bruce Campbell as Perry White. If there was anyone out there who could really capture the stubbornness and gruff of the legendary editor of the Daily Planet, it's Bruce Campbell. Bruce Campbell is such a charmer. He's such a funny guy, and I can really picture him in the suit with a big cigar, shouting out, "Olsen! Lane! Kent! Ah, great Caesar's ghost!" You know, I can really picture that because, you know, I was looking at who could play Perry White, and, you know, obviously a lot of the good choices to play that sort of character, unfortunately, are no longer with us. But then I fast forward my head into the 2000s, and the first name that came up to play Perry White was Bruce Campbell. And, you know, my good buddy Geeker Beyond is a huge Bruce Campbell fan, so this is another cast choice dedicated to him. And, you know, Bruce Campbell, the cool thing about him, he's got such a presence. You know, he could be in one scene in that entire movie, but you never forget it because he leaves such a huge mark in that one scene. You'll just want to go back and watch it all over again because he brings such an aura to his performances. Sometimes he can just give you goosebumps just by smiling, and he's got that personality. And, you know, he does look like someone who could be your boss. I really believe that. And I love Bruce Campbell. He's such a great actor. He can do it all, and he's very versatile. And I think for a couple of scenes as the editor of the Daily Planet, I think he would be perfect for that role. And the thing about Perry White is he's one of those guys, he doesn't have to play a big part in a Superman movie, but when you see him, he's there and he owns it. And he is one of those characters. He's not like Jameson. Jameson is quite horrible to his staff, but with Perry White, he isn't horrible. He's like the dad of the Daily Planet. He loves you, he'll do anything for you, but he still expects you to do your job and do it properly. And he's the old school guy. He looks out for the little guy, he looks out for everyone. And I think Bruce Campbell would embody all of those qualities beautifully. So if I was ever going to cast someone to play Perry White in a Superman movie for the 2000s, I'd definitely pick Bruce Campbell. He's the man. Absolutely love the guy. Kim Cattrall as Cat Grant. You know, it's interesting when you look at the history of Cat Grant in media. She hasn't appeared in any Superman movies up until James Gunn's Superman 2025 movie. Cat Grant has had no appearances on the big screen. She obviously was in Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, and she was, of course, in Smallville and in Supergirl. But other than that, as far as big screen movies go, not many to show. And, Cat Grant, of course, she's such a tease. She's very attractive and she flirts outrageously with Clark Kent, and she loves to have a good time. And if there's any lady out there who can play that sort of character, it's Kim Cattrall. Kim Cattrall has had a long career going all the way back to the early 80s. She starred in Porky's, Police Academy, and of course, how could we forget her legendary run in Sex and the City, where she played the man eating beast herself, Samantha. Wow. And I love Kim Cattrall. Aside from being very attractive, she is a brilliant actress. And she also was in Star Trek as well, the first movie. For those of you out there who may not know that. So she's seen it all and done it all, and she's still going very strong. She looks great, and my goodness, she's got such a sexy aura to her. The moment she walks in, you're like, wow. And she doesn't even have to say a word. And the idea of Kim Cattrall as Cat Grant bouncing off Brendan Fraser as Clark Kent, I could definitely see some fun scenes coming out of that dynamic. And like I said, Kim Cattrall is a true sex symbol, but she's more than just a pretty face. She can get it done. She's got the chops. And yeah, I think I'd love to see that. And also, as I said, Cat Grant has not really been in much live action outside of the TV shows. So I think this would be a great opportunity to bring her to the big screen for a Superman 2000s movie. And I think Kim Cattrall is the perfect lady to play that sort of character. And also, her and Courtney Cox as Lois Lane and Cat Grant. Oh, yeah, bring it on. I think that would be hilarious. So I would definitely choose her to play Cat Grant. She's awesome. Neil Flynn and Jane Seymour as Jonathan and Martha Kent. Neil Flynn will always be the sarcastic janitor who tortures JD in Scrubs. And Jane Seymour, to me, she will always be one of the most iconic Bond girls of all time, Solitaire. And these two, to me, really look the part of the Kents. And Neil Flynn, I can definitely picture him as Jonathan Kent, giving out lots of advice and just being an all round great dad. And Jane Seymour, obviously, she is a legend. She's been there and done that. She starred in James Bond, Live and Let Die, and Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. She's done a lot of stuff, and she is an iconic actress in her own right. And I think her and Neil Flynn as the Kents really bring that fatherly and motherly warmth to those characters. And I think just looking at those two, they really look the part. And if I were to show their pictures to someone and ask them, do these two people to you look like they could be your parents? They would turn around and say, yeah, definitely. I can imagine these two as parents for someone. And I think those two as the Kents with Brendan Fraser as Clark, I could see some really nice touching scenes with the three of them. And I can picture their dynamic being similar to Superman the animated series, where Clark was very apprehensive about, people wanting to know more about Superman. So I can imagine those two giving him that kind of advice about, well, you can tell them a little bit about yourself, but not too much. Just remember, keep your identity a secret, son. There are bad people out there who want to hurt you and try and get to us. So just be careful. And, the two of them individually, Neil Flynn is a great actor, and Jane Seymour is a brilliant actress. They've got the chops, they can do it all, and they would bring so much love to a Superman 2000s movie. So if I was ever going to pick someone to play Jonathan and Martha Kent, it would definitely be Neil Flynn and Jane Seymour. Even if it was just for a couple of scenes, I think those two would really embody, the heart of the Kents. And they're both great. Malcolm McDowell and Glenn Close as Jor-El and Lara. So, in keeping with tradition of Jor-El looking much older, Malcolm McDowell is a legendary actor, Glenn Close is a legendary actress, and the two of them together, I think they would really work as Jor-El and Lara. And I think Malcolm McDowell could definitely bring that strict fatherly approach of Jor-El that Marlon Brando brought in the first Superman movie and in the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2. And Malcolm McDowell is a legend, he's done it all. And in a way, I think him playing Jor-El could be very close to what Terence Stamp brought to Jor-El in Smallville. So I definitely think he would nail it as Jor-El, especially where the science is concerned. And the same with Glenn Close. She's done it all as well. And she would definitely fit the part of Lara, in terms of being the loyal wife and being the doting mother of baby Kal-El. And you would only need them to be in a couple of scenes on Krypton and maybe in a couple of flashbacks and obviously appear as a AI spirit in the Fortress of Solitude if Superman ever needed some advice from his Kryptonian parents. And I think Malcolm McDowell and Glenn Close, obviously being two iconic figures in movies and television, I think they would definitely bring a lot of class to a Superman 2000s movie. And I'm a huge fan of both. I have the utmost respect for Malcolm McDowell and I love Glenn Close. I still love Fatal Attraction. I think that was her finest hour. And I just think those two, as the Kryptonian parents of Superman, would be absolutely perfect. And Malcolm McDowell, just looking at him, he definitely looks like somebody who could play Jor-El. And Glenn Close, I think she could really look the part of Lara. So if I was ever going to pick two people to play the Kryptonian parents of Superman, it would definitely be the iconic duo of Malcolm McDowell and Glenn Close. I just think they're two true legends, and it would definitely get people talking, in my opinion. Billy Zane as Lex Luthor. Billy Zane as Lex Luthor has been my dream cast choice for many years. And I came across a fan made picture of Billy Zane as Lex Luthor. And holy cow, he looks exactly like Lex Luthor from Superman, the animated series. Billy Zane is a great actor, and he can play a bad guy so good. And, for a Superman 2000s movie, I wouldn't really want to see Billy Zane playing that campy, I'm the greatest criminal mind of all time. I don't think that would fit his personality as an actor. The version of Lex Luthor that I think would fit Billy Zane's performance beautifully is the one they went with in the DCAU, where he was a billionaire businessman with a scientific mind, and he was more like a crime boss. And you knew he was a criminal, but you couldn't prove it. And I can imagine, just talking about it right now, I can imagine Billy Zane as Lex Luthor drinking a glass of whiskey in his suit, walking around Brendan Fraser's Superman, making snide comments and just being an all round dick and having a smug attitude and saying to him, well, Superman, if you think I'm a criminal, prove it. Because if you have no proof, then get out of my office. But the thing about Billy Zane playing a villain, I wouldn't really want to see him screaming at the top of his voice and shouting. I prefer him to be really calm because there's something more sinister and uncomfortable when a villain is really calm. And I can imagine him, as Superman flies away, Billy Zane playing Lex Luthor, saying to himself, oh, well, I guess I'll just have to kill you. And then just has that little smirk. But then when he does lose it, it's scary and it means something. And I can just picture him in various scenes, say, for example, on the news, telling people, I've told you, Superman is an alien. He cannot be trusted. How do we know there aren't more Kryptonians out there? Maybe Superman sees himself as our ruler. Maybe he wants to take over and repopulate our planet. If you listen to me, we can do something about this threat before it's too late. And I think Billy Zane could really nail that version of Lex Luthor. And I can just picture him again holding the kryptonite, getting in Superman's face and saying, oh, this little souvenir is from your world. It's funny, this small little part of your world will be the death of you. And you know what's going to happen? After you're dead, people look at me as their hero. They'll look at me and say, Lex Luthor saved us from the threat of Superman. I'm just getting chills thinking about it. And there's a picture, fan made pictures of Billy Zane as Lex Luthor. And I even came across a recent one. He looks exactly like him. Weight, height, build, the whole package. I personally think Billy Zane as Lex Luthor would have been legendary, in my opinion. And he just resembles the DCAU Lex Luthor so much. Why he was never cast as Lex Luthor is shocking. Truly a huge missed opportunity. But if we had a Superman movie in the 2000s, I'd definitely pick Billy Zane, hands down. He looks the part, he can act the part, and he's just a phenomenal actor. So I would definitely cast Billy Zane as Lex Luthor. Just unbelievable. Okay, then. Speaking of unbelievable, Hugo Weaving as Brainiac. Just like Cap Grant, when you look at the history of Brainiac in media, as far as live action is concerned, Brainiac hasn't really got that many appearances apart from Smallville and Krypton. And of course, as we all know, Brainiac is one of the heavy hitters in the comic books and in animation. But his live action appearances are pretty much non existent. And we know that Brainiac is set to make his big screen debut in James Gunn's 2027 Superman sequel, Man of Tomorrow, which I am, no pun intended, super pumped to be seeing. But Brainiac, to me, has always been one of those villains who gets spoken of. He's going to be appearing in the next Superman movie, and then right at the last second, he gets pulled out, and that's it, never to be spoken of again. And I find that quite frustrating because Brainiac is definitely up there with Lex Luthor as far as main enemies of Superman. And I feel with someone like Hugo Weaving, he would do an excellent job in portraying the robotic coldness of Brainiac. And of course, Hugo Weaving, he's so good at playing villains. He was phenomenal as Agent Smith in the Matrix movies, and he's had a long career. And the idea of Hugo Weaving playing Brainiac is very appealing. And I can really see him delivering a performance very similar to what James Masters did in Smallville. Very calm, very fluid, and very robotic and calculating in everything Brainiac does and the way he speaks and the way he executes all of his plans. And, you know, what I've always loved about Hugo Weaving and the way he performs, his performances as villains is almost very Shakespearean. He's not over the top by saying things like, I'm going to destroy the world. He always gets you thinking about things. And that's what makes a good villain. It's not necessarily about who's got the best lines or who can be the most over the top. The best villains are always the ones who think they're right, and Brainiac is definitely the one who fits that bill beautifully. And Hugo Weaving could really play that sort of version of Brainiac. So just picture this scene. Superman could ask Brainiac, why did you shrink and steal the city of Kandor? And Brainiac could turn around and say, because I had to, because I wanted to preserve all life. This way, Krypton's legacy lives on and isn't dust in outer space. Isn't that what you want, Kal-El? For Krypton to live again? He's always asking questions, he's always getting you thinking. And I think Hugo Weaving, when he does turn, he really turns. And I feel the same way about Brainiac. And I think Hugo Weaving could definitely nail Brainiac. And The thing with Brainiac, he's not had many appearances in live action, so bringing him to the big screen in the 2000s, especially after Superman the animated series, would feel like a big deal because his presence would be very fresh in the people's minds. So, if there was anyone I wanted to see play Brainiac in a Superman 2000s movie, it would definitely be Hugo Weaving. And I can just imagine him and Billy Zane having some scenes together as Lex Luthor and Brainiac. I think that would be really epic, in my opinion. Okay, moving on to the next one. Sean Bean as General Zod. I'm a huge Sean Bean fan. I've been a fan of Sean Bean since Sharp, so that'll give you an idea of how long I've been a fan of this guy. Sean Bean is an amazing actor, and he's done it all. And Sean Bean has been in Lord of the Rings. He's been in Game of Thrones. He's pretty much done it all. James Bond. But the one thing that Sean Bean has always been known throughout his career is he always dies at the end of every movie. But that wouldn't be the case here for a Superman movie. And, playing somebody like General Zod, who is definitely up there with Lex Luthor and Brainiac, is a big deal. And, General Zod, as far as live action is concerned, he's had quite a few appearances. Obviously, Terence Stamp left his mark as General Zod in the first two Superman movies, and he's looked upon as the definitive depiction of that villain. So Sean Bean would have some pretty big shoes to fill playing one of Superman's greatest enemies. And General Zod, of course, he's been in Smallville, he's been in the comic books, he was in Man of Steel. He's made the rounds, but he's not been in much animation, which I find very strange. So, I can imagine Sean Bean bringing that arrogance and aristocratic behavior that Zod is known for. And I think a military approach to General Zod would be much better suited for Sean Bean's portrayal because I wouldn't really want to see him just copying Terence Stamp. I would like to see something completely different. And I think making General Zod more like a soldier who's seen a lot of stuff, he's been in lots of battles, I think that would work more for Sean Bean as far as performance goes. And, his General Zod, he should be all about fighting and believing in what he says and just ultimately, of course, looking for revenge against the person who banished him to the Phantom Zone. And who better to take out your frustrations than on the son of Jor-El himself, Superman? And I just think that Sean Bean, he's a great actor. I think he could definitely embody that brutality of General Zod as far as being on the battlefield. And of course, we've got to hear him say Neil Pavol Zod, but I don't think I would want to hear him say it in Terence Stamp's sort of voice. I would more like to hear him say it as like a command rather than just being an arrogant prick. So I can imagine Sean Bean fighting Superman and screaming at him, say, "You will kneel before Zod! I command it!" Something like that. And, I definitely would love to see them go for that War of the Supermen sort of battle because we've seen that in Man of Steel, which was awesome. So I definitely would love to see that in a Superman 2000s movie. And personally, I think Sean Bean cut his hair really short, give him a full beard, put on a cape or a long robe or something like that, some combat gear, I think he could really rock it as General Zod, and he's a phenomenal actor, and I think he would be perfect playing one of Superman's greatest enemies, in my opinion. I just think Sean Bean would absolutely kill it, no pun intended. So there you have it, guys, my cast choices for a Superman 2000s movie. It is a shame that we never got a brand new Superman movie at the beginning of the new millennium. I think that would have been the perfect time to really bring back Superman in a big way. But obviously, we didn't get that. We had to wait until 2006 to have a brand new Superman movie. And, I love Brandon Routh, but Superman Returns wasn't the best Superman movie. But it was still a lot better than Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, which, quite frankly, isn't that hard. But I think if they had made a Superman movie in the early 2000s, I definitely would have gone with these cast choices because a lot of them are very talented. Some, of course, are legendary. And I just think these guys would have really brought Superman back to the big screen in a big way. But it is what it is. The 2000s has long passed, but does make you wonder if they had gone ahead with making a Superman movie in the early 2000s, who would he have cast in the roles? Speculation, we'll never know. But if they were going to make a movie in the early 2000s of Superman, I definitely would have gone with these guys. And I think I made some good choices, but I'll leave that up to you guys to decide for yourself if you agree or not. So that's going to be it from me. I'm going to wrap this up now. What do you think of my cast choices for a Superman 2000s movie? Do you agree with them? Do you like any of the choices I made? Would you have gone with these picks, or would you have gone with different picks of your own? Who would you have cast to play Superman? Who would you have cast to play Lois? Who would you have cast to play Lex Luthor? Who would you have cast to play the Kents? Who would you have cast to play Jor-El and Lara? And who would you have cast to play General Zod or Brainiac? You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time. So until then, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.